Max Sand here with another No Journalism review, this time for Elden Ring. The visuals are of my endgame character in earlier zones just to minimize spoilers, but there will be some visual and light story spoilers in this review. Elden Ring is a big topic to tackle, and where to start is the question. So I'll start with myself and Dark Souls. I used the GameFly rental program back in the day, 2011 or so, on Xbox 360, and basically they would send you a game and you'd send it back when you were done, and then they would send you a new one, like Netflix used to do for DVDs, only for video game discs. One of the many games they sent me was Dark Souls, and I popped it in and I got to the Firelink Shrine, having done the tutorial, eager to set out in the world, and I went left and came across some skeletons, and these skeletons whooped my ass over and over. And for a while I thought, well, I heard this game was hard, just keep at it. So I made my way through, learning the combat, into the catacombs, and then there was just more and harder skeletons, and they even started respawning. At some point, I gave up, decided the game was just garbage, and sent it back to GameFly and was done with it. I kept hearing people raving about it in the years following. Cries of "get good" rang out, and I figured, well, I just didn't want to. If the first enemies in the game were that hard, well, I thought that I was a gamer, but that's just asking too much of me. Not for me, nope. Just another weird Japanese game that I wouldn't like, much like JRPGs and dating sims. Flash forward and it's on PC, which is my platform of choice, and there's a steep discount on Steam. Dark Souls 2 and 3 had come and gone, and well, shit, maybe I was wrong. For $5, who cares? Let's give it another go. I installed the Prepare to Die edition, even used the DS Fix mod, booted it up, and noticed something this time that I hadn't before. I got to Firelink Shrine, and there was this staircase on the right. I followed that into the Undead Parish, and well, fell in love with the game. The enemies turn out kind of scale based on your level. And though still challenging when you learn how to block, dodge, parry, suddenly you can get good. Now you have better equipment. Now when you go to fight the skeletons, it's a lot easier. I immediately followed it up by playing Dark Souls 2 and 3, which is my favorite. I know, blasphemous to the OG Dark Souls guys, but it is. I don't have a PlayStation, but I heard about how people love Bloodborne, and he even played a lesser-known series called The Surge, which has similar combat and mechanics, but in a sci-fi world. So when I heard about Elden Ring, I was kind of sold. Not because of fantasy author George R.R. Martin's involvement, though that does add some weight to the proceedings, but for the very notion of open-world Dark Souls. Well, what did that mean? Open-world games can be amazing, or they can be tedious chore factories. How would you get that tight level design in an open world? Can I still go left and into the skeletons and just get killed? The game launched and I found out. I didn't watch much coverage of the game, didn't want to spoil any of it. I booted it up and decided to be kind of a paladin character and went in. Tutorial boss still got me in the end, but I gave him a more valiant effort than I have in previous installments, and here I was coming out of the caverns into the open world. There's a golden knight on his horse there. First enemy outside. I see the big Elden tree behind him, which is a golden thing that takes up the whole skybox, and let's go, buddy. And I got obliterated, as most of you did, or will. There's a boss way over your level, ready to beat you bloody, right outside the tutorial area. Yep, it's a Souls game. You're inevitably supposed to run away, heroically of course, which I did, and soon enough you get a horse and told vaguely to head north to a castle. However, nothing is making you, and any good RPG player goes exploring. Well, I found mini dungeons with actual unique bosses, secret ruins with treasure, traps, maps, special enemies, quest NPCs, merchants, and more all around that first area, and I knew then that this is my game. As I continued to the castle and its inevitable first major boss, Margit, I hadn't even found out the secret item to make him easier. I found the cave that it was in, but as usual, I went left instead of right to find patches. But I didn't need it, because I have a few Souls games under my belt, not to mention the new Ashes summon system, where you can summon an NPC companion, so my trusty jellyfish of poisonous death helped out a little bit by tanking. When I got out the other side, I realized the map keeps zooming out as I add more bits and pieces of exploration to it. Many times on my 110-hour journey to finishing the game, I said, "How fucking big is this map?" And I continued finding new areas and new dungeons right up until the 100 or so hour mark when I found the final area, and still have not explored every nook and cranny of the lands between, and in fact might have missed a lot. There are entire legacy dungeons, those being the larger, more story-focused dungeons with a major boss at the end, that you could completely miss, including the major bosses. I hunted down and killed every single boss with an achievement. I explored, I did every quest I could without a guide or looking anything up. I soaked up every bit of this game and adored it. So besides gushing about the open world, what is Elden Ring to a non-Dark Souls fan, a complete newcomer? Well, it's a very hard action RPG set in a dark fantasy world which is on the verge of collapse. The goddess Marika has disappeared, and the magical MacGuffin she used to order the land, the aforementioned Elden Ring, has been shattered. Large shards of it were taken by her demigod children, and smaller shards are part of all the creatures and peoples of the land. You, as a tarnished, sort of a banished outsider, are brought back to the lands between to collect the shards and reform the ring, becoming an Elden Lord. At least that's the setup, and there are other options. You're undead, so every time you die, you just come back. Convenient, because you will die. Combat is brutal, tactical, weighty, and physical, yes, even magic, and is very much the refined version of Dark Souls combat. It's hard, intentionally so and without any guilt, but there is something just a tad different here to other games in this style that sets it apart. For newcomers, it's a punishing system where every attack, every action has a level of commitment to the animation, with a light and heavy attack as your default, blocking and dodging, as well as item usage such as the healing flasks known as Estus in previous games and tears in this game, where one or two hits from an enemy can be your death. It's a slower, more methodical style of combat with a more serious consequence for both you and enemies than a typical hack and slash sort of action combat most people would be familiar with in the vein of Fable. This includes casting of spells, which lock the player into an animation. When in an animation for the attack or spell or item use, the player is vulnerable to enemy attacks, which again can be brutal and fatal and come very, very fast. However, the enemy follows the same rules, and thus it's this dance of death with a sense of fatality and lethality in every move you make, and it takes place in a very moment-to-moment way which few other games can give. When you die, you drop your runes, which act as experience points, souls in previous games, and you can pick them back up if you walk back to the spot where you left them. That's the only penalty for death. Die before you get there, and, well, you just lost the level. So better to bank them when you can at a site of grace or bonfires from previous games. Not enough for a level? Well, maybe you have to gamble. Go out there and risk it for a biscuit, or maybe you go farm those easy enemies until you get just enough so that you can level up and take less souls with you into the world, so you're risking less. The game doesn't tell you what to do. You figure it out. Very much what many of us love about older games. You will die. I cannot stress that enough. Even the best Souls players do. It's baked into the cake. You die, you learn. Oh, that guy does this attack when he runs at me. Encounter design has always been at the strength of a Souls game, and you might think the open world would dilute that. Enemies and traps in Dark Souls are placed very specifically to cause the player to encounter them in a very certain way from a certain direction, both learning and having certain reactions to them. So how could a wide open world do likewise? Well, for one, the dungeons you encounter are designed the same way, and some of the open world itself is too. In particular, spoiler alert, an early game dragon that just kind of flies out of nowhere that you would not expect unless maybe you saw the initial trailer for the game, but I didn't. That first enemy that I mentioned, a literal boss fight in the open world as soon as you step outside, yeah, you will learn either to run the hell away from him, fight things that you can handle, gear up, and come back, or you will learn that if you just persist, throw your body at the enemy, die over and over again, learn the enemy's patterns and tells, and keep dying and dying and dying, eventually you will win, which leads to exploration, formulating a plan, adapting to wrinkles in the plan, dusting yourself off, and trying again. The core loop of Elden Ring. Explore then. Maybe you went left, and maybe you should go right. Left and right aren't the only places you can go. In my exploration, I found gear, items, spells, runes to level up. I became stronger long before I ever hit that market boss, who's a stumbling block for many who went right to him without exploration, because that's what the game tells you to do. And I was more or less OP. He still provided a fair challenge, but I was better equipped than most to handle it. That is what Dark Souls games didn't have before to this degree. It's a way to get good at your own pace, rather than bang your head against the wall until you beat it. Certainly, you've always had left or right, but now you have an entire world, and there are certain funnel points you will inevitably have to hit, but you don't have to hit them unprepared. Enemies don't scale with your level, so maybe you venture off into a direction where they're really hard to beat. Never impossible, mind you. If you master the fundamentals of combat, you can beat the whole game naked with a stick. Maybe you turn back. While there you find a powerful set of armor. Every bit makes you stronger, more versatile. Returning from Dark Souls 3 are also weapon arts, known here as Ashes of War. In addition to your normal and heavy attacks, blocks, and rolls, you have access to a special weapon attack, many of which are exclusive to that magical weapon, though some of which you can apply to any normal weapon. Some of these, like my Taker's Flame from the Blasphemous Blade, for those who've watched some of my guides, are very powerful and scale with your stats to become more so. Magic has a larger role here than in many previous Souls games, as it encourages you to use at least some. Indeed, certain bosses, including the very last one, seem not to favor melee builds at all, and on the flip side, some spells and builds are ridiculously overpowered. I'm certain you could beat the game as an exclusive melee character, but it would be significantly harder. I started as a typical sword and board paladin knight, but by endgame almost exclusively used faith-based incantation magic, slinging lightning bolt like Zeus on steroids. The variety of builds is vast. Regardless of your build, though, you're in for a lot of combat, many bosses, and if you're an explorer type like me, over 100 hours or more of fresh content. Multiplayer can be confusing for newcomers. This is not a co-op game. Yes, it has co-op potential in it, but that's not the point. It is a single-player game at its absolute core. Those expecting to play the entire campaign with friends are going to need to learn the system and expect to be frustrated at best. In-game consumables need to be crafted, summon signs need to be found in the world, and a limit on how far you can go from each other and the use of a horse are just some of the issues faced by the I want to co-op it all crowd. However, on the flip side, for veterans or even newcomers, summoning in help for a boss can be a lifesaver. Invading and being invaded and dueling all work as they have in previous games. PvP can be thrilling, heartbreaking, or infuriating. Your mileage may vary. Remember, it's all about the build you bring and the build the other person brings. Graphics, while perhaps not at the cutting edge, Elden Ring looks great. Environments are detailed, unique, handcrafted with a lot of care. And even when tile sets get reused for dungeons, they have different gimmicks, traps, ideas, and layouts. The only real hang-up with the graphics for me on PC, and this may be fixed later on, so don't hold me to this, is the stuttering issue. And oh boy, is it a hang-up. So you may even see it in the video for this, but every now and again, especially I find when first starting the game up for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the play experience, it does smooth out for me after several minutes, although it does come back after an extended 2 or 3 hour session of the game. The game will hang, sometimes for an entire second. When split second timing and dexterity is life or death, this is completely unacceptable, and I really hope FromSoft can smooth this out. I can't ignore it. It caused me a lot of frustration over 100 hours, and even if it wasn't enough to ruin the game for me, it needs to be mentioned here. Outside of those moments, frame rate was usually smooth as butter, all settings extreme on my mid-range PC setup with a GTX 1660. Otherwise, the game looks great, and the art design of the world itself is spectacular. I did also run into well over a dozen crashes in my 100 hours or so. I'm not really sure if that's just my setup. Your mileage may vary there. Sound, clunky clangs and meaty thwacks permeate all of combat. However, the music is great, orchestral, high fantasy stuff without being really overbearing, and the title track is an absolute banger. It's a whimsical, often sad, but subdued as you explore the open world, sometimes not even having music and just the ambient sounds, but it really kicks into high gear when you face a boss fight. Voice acting is sparse but solid, though this is not a Mass Effect style RPG with tons and tons of voice dialogue and options and wheels of choices to make. Indeed, most of your time is spent without words at all, a refreshing change to the protagonist who never shuts the fuck up of many modern Western games. Story. It's there. It's serviceable. It's a bit less obtuse than Dark Souls in that it tells a lot of the story in-game in an easy-to-understand manner, though much of the lore is still hidden in item descriptions and open to interpretation and perhaps even subject to translation errors. It's not the story that sells this game, but it's not a bad story, and even as you dig into it and ponder some of it a bit more, it might be fantastic. It does seem that George R.R. Martin's part in it wasn't necessarily writing the story, and more of like a world-building thing lying underneath it all, because at the end of the day, this is a very Dark Souls story. If they had changed a few words and names of things, it would absolutely qualify as Dark Souls 4. So generally, I don't do big releases for reviews. This is in fact the first AAA release I've ever done. I prefer indie games to help expose them to more people, so why this one? Well, I have to address the elephant in the room. Crazy fucking game journos. And this time, even more than that, crazy fucking game developers. Some of them being from Ubisoft, or the studio that created Horizon Forbidden West, which launched around the same time. There have been many arguments thrown at the game by them, or left-wing partisans who just hate what gamers like, or just plain old contrarians who just dislike it because it's popular. Firstly, no, it doesn't need a fucking easy mode. Period. The artist's visions isn't in easy mode. Sorry, not sorry if that excludes you. It almost excluded me in the original Dark Souls, as I led this review with. Either get over it or go play something else. I'm not going to dignify this argument with any more time than that. Fuck Jim Sterling. Secondly, the UI is fine. I don't get this argument at all. Apparently devs on some of these big budget Western AAA games like Horizon and Assassin's Creed say the UI is bad and it's hard to find things. All we need to do then is look at their hand-holdy, way too easy, grindy, cluttered maps full of busy work to know that maybe minimalism isn't a bad change, it's just different to their maximalism style. Maybe less is more, fuck off. Thirdly, yes, it's basically just a really big Dark Souls game with a horse. No, it didn't need to innovate any further than that for me to adore it, or for it to sell almost 20 million copies at launch across all three platforms, Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. It really did innovate and change the formula in a lot of subtle ways, and a lot of ways of refinement. But just having an open world and a horse isn't changing the fucking game fundamentally, sure, but no one is stopping these other devs from taking that formula and doing that themselves. Elden Ring refined what worked in previous games, and it seems to have worked and paid huge dividends for FromSoft. Maybe you should learn something and shut your fucking mouths. And finally, a system in any Souls game is players can leave messages on the ground that other players will be able to read within a set system with ad-lib style, fill in the blanks, and a small number of words. Sometimes it's to offer help or just point out a secret. Other times it's there to tell you that, hey, there's a secret over here, just jump off this cliff. Still, other times it's poetry or commentary on the game lore, such as Tears Ahead, and then we have memes, such as calling every creature in the entire world a dog. Game journalists hate the fucking memes. Try finger butthole. I put that message myself in the starter area at launch. Yes, it's funny, and no, it's not sexual harassment. It's a fucking joke. Get over yourselves. 14,000 upvotes on mine. Maybe you need to lighten up. Get good at life, not just the game. So the question we are left is, who is this game for? Well, if you're up for dying 50 times to the same enemy and then finally killing it, maybe you. If you want to explore, but not a million icons of modern open world games telling you what busy work to go do here and there and dropping the quest icons on your HUD, but just find stuff organically, just you and the minimalist compass on screen, then probably you. If you like Dark Souls, definitely you. If you are in those categories, it still might even be for you if you try it, although maybe later, like I did with Dark Souls 1, when the hype has died down and you can go left yourself. So I rate games on a fucking buy it, wait for a fucking Steam sale, or just plain fuck it scale, and if you haven't guessed, for most gamers, fucking buy it. This is a phenomenal 10 out of 10 game, assuming that they fix the frame rate stuttering issue on PC, and I plan to play through the entire game again.